All right, it's time to get started on this dark and stormy night. Maybe nobody get any serious damage out of it. We blessed to get the rain though. A few announcements. Remember Sherry Reichert scheduled for pacemaker and defibrillator procedures on October 26th. Lisa Coker is at home recovering from her surgery, and I think Michael said she's starting therapy today. Reese Smith, Doug Molly's great-granddaughter, is home, and her tests were good. David Payton has been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. Let's continue to remember all those who are on our prayer list and sick list that's having treatment, surgeries, shut in at home, other health difficulties. Randy Holly, Mary Frances Clifton, Nellie Coker, Sophie Grubbs, Doris Delaney, Linda Butler, Jeannie Fowler, Freddie Brown. Are there any others we need to add to that list? Also, we want to keep in mind the Reichert family and their loss this past week. And as well, we need to remember Hannah Stanley and her loss with her grandmother. Remember those families and keep them in your prayers. There will be a leaders meeting Sunday morning, this coming Sunday morning at 8 in the annex. Also, remember that we are collecting for Pineville for the children's home for the pantry. Items to collect are dryer sheets, canned goods, AA and AAA batteries. And there's some collection baskets out in the foyer, and I think the deadline on that is October the 16th, Sunday. Also, keep in mind the scare on the square for Halloween. We need bags of candy so we can swap over and fill those bags up and be able to hand that out that night. And if you're able to help with that, you can come up on the square and help pass the candy out. Any other announcements? All right, Jim will lead us in our singing. Billy Grubbs will have the scripture reading, and Richard Comer will have the prayer.
Come on, Jim. I'll be reading from Numbers 8, 5 through 8. Numbers 8, 5 through 8. Then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Aaron and say to him, When you mount the lamps, the 7 lamps will give you light in the front of the lampstand. Aaron therefore did so. He mounted its lamps at the front of the lampstand, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now this was the workmanship of the lampstand. Hammered work of gold from its base to its flowers. It was hammered work, according to the pattern which the Lord had showed Moses. So he made the lampstand. Again, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Take the Levites from among the sons of Israel and cleanse them. Thus you shall do to them for their cleansing. Sprinkle purifying water on them, and let them use a razor over their whole body and wash their clothes, and they will be clean. Then let them take a bull with its grain offering, fine flour mixed with oil, and a second bull you shall take for a sin offering.
(772) be your song of invitation. 772. Tonight for our Bible class in here, we're going to be studying about Numbers chapter 8. And in studying Numbers 8, it's divided into 2 parts, as Billy read from both of the parts here for us. And it's very interesting that the first is about the candlestick that he read about. And the first few verses he read there about how Aaron followed God's law and followed God's command and did exactly as God told him to do. And then the second part is where I want us to focus on for devotional is the idea that he has the Levites come forth. He has the Levites come forth. He cleanses them. They go through this process in verse 7 that they are to be sprinkled with water, a purification, a certain kind of water they were to use. They were to have the razor over their body. They were to wash their clothes. They were to cleanse themselves. They were to take a bath, and they were to be set aside for God. And what we're going to see tonight as we continue through chapter 8 is that they were to offer sacrifices on behalf of these people. They were to be sacrificed, or they were to have a sacrifice in their place, because God's going to say the Levites are going to take the place of the firstborn. The firstborn that God will say is rightfully mine because of Passover, because of what was given there. He says, I'm going to take the Levites. And we've already heard this before, but what's interesting about this, I thought about this today, was the fact that the Levites here are set apart. And they were offered to God. Again, they were offered with a substitutionary sacrifice. There was another sacrifice given in their place so that the Levites could be dedicated to God, and so that they could be His people, and they could be the ones who serve the tabernacle, who serve in the tent of meeting, who do all those things the Levites and the priests were called to do. And as I thought about that, I kept coming back to the idea of our life and of our being. Because we see this in the Old Testament. We see these priests were a certain group of people, had to be a certain age group, had to be a certain family, had to be all these certain things. But we know that in the New Testament, the New Covenant, God, or Jesus, when He came, He did away with that old covenant. He fulfilled that, and He made us all priests. He put us all in this position of being cleansed, of being sanctified, of being the people who could come into His presence to worship Him and to serve Him. And you know, it's a very interesting idea to see that Peter draws that conclusion when he talks about that we are a royal priesthood, a priesthood dedicated to God, set apart from God, obedient for God. Tonight, I want you to think about your life. I want you to think about what you're doing, how you're acting, how you're living. And I want to ask you, are you living a life that's set apart for God? You see, that's the idea of being holy, being sanctified, is being set aside, being pure, being apart from the world. And you know, when we get to the New Testament, we see that's what happens to us. When we go to Christ and we follow His commands, we are cleansed as these Levites were. We are washed clean from our sins when we enter into that great water grave of baptism. We come into contact with that blood, and it washes us clean. Our sins are forgiven, to be remembered no more. And then we rise to walk a new life. This chapter, we're going to see the Levites are going to cleanse themselves. We talk about here. They're going to offer their sacrifice, and then they're going to live a new life. They're going to live a life in which they work in the tabernacle. They protect God's plan. They protect God's building. And you know, that's the parallel for what we are. We are now God's people who have been set aside, who have been purposed for a reason, who have a job to serve and worship our God. So tonight, I want you to think and ask yourself, are you being that set aside person for God? Are you being that sanctified, holy person God has called you to be? If you're not, we encourage you to change your life so that you are. If you're not a Christian, you've never been set aside, you've never been sanctified, we encourage you to do that. Take those steps, become that child of His, or ask us and we'll study with you and show you what that means. Or if you're like most of us, you've done those steps, you've done that part of life, are you living that sanctified life? Because you see that act of baptism, that submission to Christ is really the easy part. It's a life that follows. That's the hard part. It's a life of submission to God. To say, God, I am yours. I am your servant. I'm your worker. I'm here for you. Tonight I want to ask you, have you given your life to God? Are you living that sanctified, set-apart life for God? If you're not, we encourage you to change your life so that you are. And ask that if you need anything, you'll come as together we stand and as we sing. Why do you wait, dear brother? Oh, why do you tarry so long? Your Savior is waiting to give you a place in His sanctified throne. Why not? Why not? Why not come to Him now? brother, the harvest is passing away. Your Savior is coming to get you. There's danger and death in delay. Why not? Why not? Why not come to him now? Why not? Why not? Why not come to him now? All right. If you would, get your Bibles and turn with us to Numbers chapter 8. Numbers 8, if you're not turned there yet. We're going to study this next part of the book of Numbers as we look at these discussions and we look at what God has been talking about. Now, you remember last week, or 2 weeks ago, I apologize, last week we weren't here because of a funeral, but 2 weeks ago we were in Numbers 7, and we told you that chronologically we went backwards because what happens is the numbering, the census of Israel happens before or after this happens, because it happens about a month or so after the tabernacle is built. We're going to see tonight that God has went back and telling us what has happened when the tabernacle was being constructed. That's chapter 7. And in chapter 6, he's going to be, Aaron is setting up the lampstand. And again, that was done a month before the census. And so this is going to be interesting that he consecrates the Levites. And what we're going to see in this chapter is that God's going to consecrate the Levites before he counts the Levites. He's going to dedicate them to their service before they are counted and numbered into that service. So we're going to see that tonight. So I want you to see that we're going to go, again, back in time to the setting up of the tabernacle, which is the end of the book of Exodus. That was the very last thing. They set up the tabernacle, and God's presence descended upon that tabernacle once it was completed. And so you'll notice beginning in verse 1, now the Lord spoke to Moses. Again, we're going to see that pattern twice here. The Lord spoke to Moses, and this is what he said. And you notice again, God tells Moses, speak to Aaron. Moses, you take this to Aaron, and you tell Aaron, when you set up the lamps, the seven lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand. So you see they're talking here. God tells Moses what's going to happen with these lampstands. You remember the lampstand, or what is also called the menorah, is an 7-branch light stand. It has one main part in the middle, and then it has 3 branches that are typically designed to be used on the sides of it. And so God tells Aaron what's going to happen is you're going to go in and you're going to take 7 lamps, and they're going to sit on top of that lampstand. And this is sort of where I'm trying to think how to word this right. We sometimes get a bad mental picture here because if you've got the King James Version, it doesn't call it a lampstand, but it calls it a what? What's the end of verse 2? Yeah, a candlestick. But the confusing part about that is if you look back up in the middle of that, in the middle of verse 2, it says, when thou lightest the lamps. And then it talks about a candlestick. So what this is, and this is something that for years, this was the mental picture I always had, was you had, we have the candlesticks, that you have the gold or silver candlestick, and you just stick the candle in it. That's not what this was. These were branches that went up, and from what archaeologists have looked at and tried to figure out, these candlestick or this lampstand would have almost a cup or a flattened bottom on it, and you would have lamps that sat on top of this. That there were golden lamps that they could take off, put the oil in, and put it back on there. Now remember, this lamp had to be constantly burning. This lamp was to never go out while it was there. Now, again, exactly how this lamp stays lit while they're moving, we don't know. But while it's in the tabernacle and in the temple, it was to be burning day and night. Matter of fact, there's one of the priests or Levite, his job is to make sure the candlesticks or the golden lampstand is burning. And so you had these lamps on top that are full of oil, and they've got the wick in them that would be burning. And Moses, or God tells Moses, when you go in, this is what you've got to do. Now, again, this is done because without the lampstand, this room is pitch black. You got to think, you're in a tent. We've talked about the thick coverings, that the wood that was the wall. Then you had the I forgot what it was now. The skins that made one covering. Then you had the leather skin that made the outside covering. There was no light getting into this building. And so this structure has to be lit by these lampstands. So this is why it's very key that these lampstands stay burning, because these were the vital parts to make sure the tabernacle was able to do. And notice God tells Aaron, this is how you're going to set it up. And again, notice verse 3, and Aaron did so. And notice the repetition here. Aaron did so. He set it up in front of the lampstand as the Lord commanded Moses. Twice, there's an emphasis. Aaron did as God told him, and Aaron did as the Lord commanded Moses. And so there's that emphasis that he did it just as God commanded him. And then you notice verse 4, and this was the workmanship of the lampstand, hammered works of gold. From its base to its flowers, it was hammered work according to the pattern that the Lord has shown Moses. So he made the lampstand. So Aaron establishes this lampstand. Apparently this lampstand is one of the last pieces that were put in. And again, this leads to an interesting question, because the question is asked, why is this here? Why are we told about Aaron fixing the candlestick? And as far as the story goes, the overall what God's talking about, the candlestick doesn't fit. It doesn't have any narrative part of it. This is included just to show the people what God wanted, how God wanted the candlestick to be done. And again, another emphasis that the tabernacle was set up exactly as God had commanded it to. And so with that in mind, and this is where you see verse 5, and the Lord spoke to Moses. That's where Billy read for us too. God changes direction. Moses, being inspired by God, changes direction and to talk about something totally different. And he begins to talk about the Levites. And you notice what he says about the Levites. Verse 6, he says, take the Levites from among the people of Israel and cleanse them, wash them. Notice, you shall cleanse them, sprinkle the water of purification upon them. There's other places this water of purification was a special kind of water that they would use that would typically have ashes from a sacrifice in it that would make it pure. And this water was sprinkled. And again, you think about this, you got to clean them, but he says sprinkle them. Well, keep reading what he says to do next. You're going to sprinkle this on them. And again, the implication here is this is the men. You're going to sprinkle this on them. Then you're going to shave them. You're going to shave their entire body from head to toe. And again, this is a major thing to do, because we've all seen it's still that way today. You know, when we see the videos and pictures of the Middle East, every man you see there, all these people, especially when we see the terrorists, the Al-Qaeda and all them, they've all got this big old beard. You know, I always think about the Duck Dynasty guys, how they got that big beard. The Middle Eastern guys have that. And that's a sign of prestige, is to have a big beard. The bigger your beard is, the more prestige you've got and more power you have. And so for God to tell these men to shave completely is to take away that power. And again, this is something that is unusual in the Middle East, because it's not like us in that the shaved face. You know, certain people, they would rather have the shaved face than a bearded face. In the Middle East, it was the beard. If you didn't have a beard, it meant you were either sick, that there was some kind of skin disease, or probably something was wrong. It was an oddity to have the shaved face. And so these men had to be shaved. And then after they're shaved, they were to wash their clothes, and then they were to cleanse themselves. They were to take a bath. Again, this is another one of part of those verses I read that I sort of get tickled that God has to tell them to take a bath. God has to tell them to get cleansed. And we can relate to that because we know, again, in our mindset, and I know I'm from the age and above, that if you didn't take a bath, a shower every day or two, that was an oddity. But I know talking to my grandparents and their parents, talk about it wasn't that way. When you didn't have running water, a bath was sometimes a luxury. You would have, before a big event, usually Saturday night before church Sunday, you would have your bath for the week. And this was how the ancient world was too. And especially the Jews as they traveled around. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would have the knives to shave, and I think, and this is my opinion, I think another reason they didn't shave as much is because they didn't have the access to free water as much. Because when you shave, you have to have the water to sort of help rinse everything out to keep the skin smooth. So they would have had the tools to do it, but may not have had the water and the things that were that not necessitate, but help that process. And again, I don't know. I can't tell you. I haven't studied it. But yeah, I've wondered that too. Because, we talk about it, like I say, they say here they shave. So they had the tool to shave, but they just chose not to. But it is a very good question, very good observation. Thank you. And so you notice they told to wash their clothes. And again, that was a big thing. Because in that time, it's not like us. And this is another part that blows my mind to think about that world. I go to our closet, I've got a hanger, the whole section, 3 or 4 feet of just my hang-up clothes. Then I've got a dresser full of my clothes. If I don't want to repeat an outfit for a few weeks, I don't have to. Some of us probably go longer than that. But they only had 2 or 3 sets of clothes. And you wore your set of clothes until it got too dirty that you couldn't wear it any longer. You swapped into your other set just so you could wash the old set and get it ready to put back on in a few days or a week. So this is a big thing when God says you got to wash your clothes, you got to take a bath, get clean, and God wants them to be clean. And this is, I think the shaving also reflects back to what we read about the leprosy and those kind of diseases to prove there was nothing, no imperfections, there was nothing, no slights, no blights, no damage to the body. Because we sometimes when we got our hair and our beard, you can sometimes hide things that are happening to your face. But when you're shaved, you can't hide any of that. And I think that was another part, is to show that they were pure, they were clean, they were able to serve as God wanted them to. And then verse 8, they take a bull from the herd and its grain offering, and they bring it, and you also take a bull from the herd for a sin offering. So again, they bring a burnt offering. Is the idea that first, and that bull from the herd and the grain offering with it, it's going to be a burnt offering. It's going to be an offering they put on the altar and it burns up completely. The other is a sin offering. Now, again, I want to emphasize this again. Just because it's a sin offering doesn't mean they're sinful. It doesn't mean it's for a specific sin. The sin, and I say that because this is a big group that we know from Numbers 3. There's 22,000 Levites who are present. One bull is not going to sacrifice for all their sins. What this bull is a sin sacrifice is also an atoning sacrifice, a covering sacrifice, a sacrifice that puts them in the right position. And so again, you may have some men that have sin, you may have some that don't, but they offer this sin offering to be put in the right place, to be covered, so that they can take this position they're about to take. And then it's verse 9. You shall bring the Levites before the tent of meeting and assemble the whole congregation of the people of Israel. Now, again, there's a question here. Is this literally all the Levites and all the people of Israel? Because you got to think, we talked about this number. There are 600,000 men in the tribe of Levi. If you add women and children, you're probably close to 2 million. You've got 2 million people trying to cram around this tent. How feasible is that going to be? How feasible is it to cram 20,000 men into the tent? Or is this speaking in representative terms? meaning that the heads of the houses were here. There were a large group here, but it may not have literally been everybody. And again, that may have been for sake of people there. And you notice that they bring the Levites before the Lord. And this is another part to ask. They bring the Levites before the Lord, before the tent, and the people of Israel lay their hands on Levites. Well, did all 2 million people have to lay their hands on these men to be Levites? Or was this the people of Israel a way of talking about the heads of the houses? Remember, we've already said there's heads of houses of every tribe. There's one leader of every tribe. And in the different houses, there were leaders of those houses. So this may sound more like, and to me, for feasibility and to make sense, is that it's not literally every person in Israel had to lay their hands on it, but by the authority of these heads of houses, they laid their hands and they showed their approval. And that's one of the things that they would do. To lay your hand on someone in the ancient world was to show you approve them, to show you agree with them, to show that you are in agreement with what they're doing. And then you notice verse 11, Aaron shall offer the Levites before the Lord as a wave offering from the people of Israel, that they may do the service of the Lord. Now, again, there's another question here. I feel like I'm saying there's a bunch of questions in this passage, and there is. One is this idea of a wave offering. It's mentioned a few times that there will be a wave offering for the Lord. Exactly what this wave offering was, we don't know exactly how they did this. You know, typically the wave offering was a piece of meat that the priest would take, and they would hold it up and lift it up before God and sort of wave it that way, and they would show that it was dedicated to God. Some have postulated that this could be that Aaron literally took these priests and sort of waved them. He swayed them back and forth to show them that they were dedicating themselves to God, or what this was. We don't know. How this offering took place, we don't know. Again, that's another difference between modern writing and ancient writing. Because again, if we were here and we were in charge of this, you know, we'd be writing down every single detail. Aaron walked up to this man. He put his hand here. This man moved this way, or he did this way. We would want all the detail we can get. But that's not the way the ancient writers did it, and it's not what God did, what God chose. And so here we have just the generics. But the other part about that is that we don't have to know. We're not required to know exactly how this worked. We just know what they did to be dedicated to God. And then you notice that verse 12, after they do this, the Levites shall lay their hands on the heads of the bulls, and you shall offer one for a sin offering and the other for a burnt offering to the Lord to make atonement for the Levites. So after this, they lay their hands on the bulls and the 2 bulls that are set forth to be the sacrifices. Again, the question is this literally mean all 22,000 Levites have to put their hand on this bull's head, or is this the heads of the families? Again, we don't know, but that's a question that comes up. And then you notice verse 13, you shall set the Levites before Aaron and his sons, and shall offer them as a wave offering to the Lord. They shall be an offering to God. They will be his people. Then we get down to verse 14. And verse 14 sort of backtracks what we talked about in Numbers 3. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the people of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. And after that, the Levites shall go in to serve at the tent of meeting, when you have cleansed them and offered them as a wave offering. For they are wholly given to me from among the people of Israel. Instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of all the people of Israel, I have taken them for myself. For all the firstborn among the people of Israel are mine, both of man and beast. On the day when I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated them for myself. And I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel. So notice what God says. God tells them here, he reminds them of that Passover. And he says, the Levites are mine. They're your sacrifice to me in the place of your children. God says there, literally, that I should have the firstborn of every male, or of every man, and of every beast. That should be my sacrifice. That should be your offering to me. But in its place, I'm taking the Levites. Now again, the other interesting thing about this, you remember in Numbers 3, there were more firstborn males than there were Levites. So why doesn't God mention that here? Well, that's because the counting, the census hasn't happened here. The census is a month after this event, so that's why there's no mention of that thing happening. But notice, God says, and you notice verse 17, God says, on the day that I struck down the firstborn of Israel, he says, I consecrated the Levites for myself. That's the day that he chose the Levites. And again, that's the day he chose to take the Levites instead of the firstborn of Israel. And then we go from there to verse 19. And I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons from among the people of Israel to do the service for the people of Israel at the tent of meeting, and to make atonement for the people of Israel, that there may be no plague among the people of Israel when the people of Israel come near the sanctuary. Now, there's a very interesting phrase or word that's used here in this verse that is sort of odd, considering who he's talking about. So let's look at this verse and let's break it down. Notice the Levites are a gift to Aaron. We've already talked about the Levites have the job that they are the ones who are going to tear the tabernacle down. They're going to carry it from one place to the next, and they're going to set it up. This is God saying, I've given Levites for that service. I've given them to Aaron. So Aaron and his sons don't have to do this. The Levite, the whole family, the whole tribe will do this. But what's interesting is the middle of that verse, that they are to do the service for the people of Israel at the tent of meeting, and, now notice this part, to make atonement for the people of Israel. Now, how did the Levites make atonement? Atonement is typically thought to be, or typically is associated with the sacrifice. The Levites never made a sacrifice. That was a priest's job, not a Levite. So how did the Levites make atonement? Well, I think God answers that in the next few verses. Because he says he make atonement for the people, that there may be no plague among the people of Israel when the people of Israel come near the sanctuary. Remember I told you the idea of atonement also means to cover, to guard. The next job of the Levites, remember the Levites camped around the tabernacle? Their job was to keep anybody who wasn't supposed to be in that tent and wasn't supposed to be in that courtyard, they kept them out. Because if anyone went into that tabernacle, if anyone went into that courtyard that wasn't supposed to be there, any Gentile who went in, they were to be put to death. And if they went in there, then it was going to be a plague on the people of Israel. You notice what God says there. He says, so there be no plague among the people. The Levite's job was to protect the tabernacle and protect its sanctity, to protect it and make sure nobody went in that tabernacle who weren't supposed to be in there. And this is their job. This is what God says I have dedicated them for. They're going to protect the sanctuary. They're going to help Aaron move it. And they're going to be the keepers. And this is sort of the idea we see from here on out. And we even see this in New Testament times. In Luke 2, when we read the birth of John the Baptist. John 1. Luke 1. Zechariah, John the Baptist's daddy, is a priest. He's come into he's a priest. But he's come into the tabernacle, or come into the temple during his family's time of service. The families would come to the temple throughout the years. Your family have a designated time you'd come to the temple. And so this job of the Levites, they were one that they still had. They were the protectors, the guards of the tabernacle and guards of the temple. And so this is where God is wanting to be. I apologize, Luke. That was a totally wrong reference I want to give. So let's notice these last few. Well, any question about those verses? God's brought the Levites up. They've cleansed them. They presented them before the people. They've offered them as a wave offering. They've sacrificed one bull as burnt offering. They sacrificed another bull as a sin offering. God says, these are my workers. These are the ones I'm giving to Aaron to help him fulfill the duty of the tabernacle. They're also here to protect the tabernacle, to guard it. Then you notice beginning of verse 20, then thus did Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel to the Levites. According to all that the Lord commanded Moses concerning the Levites, the people of Israel did them. Again, very same echo we read in the first 5 verses. Everything God said do, Aaron did. Everything God told Moses to do, Moses, Aaron, and the people and the Levites did. They faithfully obeyed this. In verse 21, and the Levites purified themselves from sins and washed their clothes, and Aaron offered them as a wave offering before the Lord, and Aaron made atonement for them to cleanse them. And after the Levites went in to do their service in the tent of meeting before Aaron and his sons, as the Lord had commanded Moses concerning the Levites, so they did to them. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, So he said that everything God said do, they did. Now we get to the last few verses. And again, these last few verses introduced an interesting statement. Let's put it that way. Notice verse 24. This applies to the Levites. From 25 years old and upward, they shall come to do this duty in the service of the tent of meeting. And from the age of 50 years, they shall withdraw from the duty of the service and serve no more. They minister to their brothers in the tent of meeting by keeping guard, and they shall do no service. Thus shall you do to the Levites in assigning their duties. Now, you may look at that and say, well, you said there was a statement that sort of seems odd. Well, what was it? Did anybody catch anything different about what Numbers 8 says versus what we read about Numbers 3? And I know it's been a month or so ago that we've done Numbers 3. Remember when God counted the Levites, what age did he start at? He started at 30. But here, God said the Levite starts from what age? 25. So that brings up the question. Again, the naysayers say, oh, well, they're proof. The Bible contradicts itself. Not necessarily. Why is Numbers 3 says 30 and Numbers 8 says 25? There are a few explanations for this. One is that the Levites have not been counted yet. Remember, I keep telling you, the census hasn't happened yet. And some say, well, God said 25 because he didn't know exactly how many was going to be there. And then after they're there, they can move the age up to 30. I don't agree with that, because to say that almost seems to say that God doesn't know what he's doing. God doesn't know. God knew the census before they took it. God knows all of us. God knew what that census was. God knew how many Levites he had, how many firstborn he had. There's no question about that. So I don't believe that's the answer. So what is the answer? What makes more sense is, again, we've got to think back to how it used to be, that the 5-year difference may be that they were an apprentice for 5 years. That the Levites entered service at age 25. And for 5 years, they worked with another Levite. They watched a Levite to see what the job was. They couldn't partake of that job. They couldn't do that job until they reached the age of 30. But from 25, they began to prepare for that service. And then at age 30, they were able to start serving. Now, the other interesting thing about this is that, and I didn't write these down, when we get to the time of David in the Chronicles actually list the age of a Levite beginning his service as age 20. So there is a little bit of difference in these ages, but some think that by that time the temple is being established, so the age is 20 because they're situated, they're stationary, they're not moving. But here God gives 25, and again I think that's a 5-year apprenticeship. But you work from the age of 25 or 30 upward to the age of 50. These were the prime years. And at the age of 50, a Levite was retired. Now, again, there's also another interesting caveat that's given to those who are age 50 and above. Because age 50 is in what talks about in verse 26. What talks about, but they shall minister, or they shall minister with their brethren, or minister to their brethren in tent of meeting. Those who are over 50 still had a job. They were to help, or they could help. They could keep the promises, the charge, the guard, and that there were certain things they had to teach those others how to do, to show them how to do it. However, they could do no service. And what some take this to mean, I think they're probably right, is that once you turn 50, you could stay on to help train and teach the younger ones what they're doing, but you cannot do it yourself. That they could do no service. They could do, one writer put it, they could do no heavy lifting. They were almost what we would call a manager, a supervisor. They could stay on to make sure they had everything right, but they were no longer an active part. They were just there directing people. And again, this would be that key idea that they would be the ones who would also help with the younger ones to make sure they know. And again, you think about it. If you got somebody, and this is the other thing about this tent of meeting, is you've only got a 20-year window that you work here. That's 20 years, and you've got to pass this down to family. We think about some jobs, and maybe not now, but it used to be people work 30, 40 years at a job and then they got to train their replacement. Well, that's a hard thing because they got to try to teach 30, 40 years. Well, here you've got 20 years you've got to try to teach. And what I'm getting at is that's a quicker turnover than we probably realize of how quickly these men would age out, and they would have to bring somebody else in, and they would have to teach this younger people, the younger Levites, okay, this is how you do it. This is how you load the tabernacle. This is how you load the tent. This is how you fold it. You've got to take the bases. You've got to take the poles. And so the Levites have the job. And this is what's interesting to me as I've studied this, is to see just what all the Levites were required to do. They weren't just there to stand around and do nothing. They had very important jobs. They were to guard the tabernacle. They were to help with its deconstruction and moving. And they were to help with setting it up and then anything Aaron and his sons needed. They were almost, one writer put it this way, the Levites were almost like the gophers. If there was something Aaron and the priest needed that they didn't have in the temple or the tabernacle complex or temple complex, the Levites would be the ones who would go out and get it and bring it back to Aaron. And so this is the role they had. And I want you to see that these have a very important role. Again, they're just right under the priest, but they have to be consecrated, just like the priests were consecrated. They had to go through this process. And again, we see that their job was not one to be taken lightly, but it was a very important job to God. And God said, set these men aside for me. They're going to do this job. And again, they're going to be the ones who are working and protecting the tabernacle. And this is the job we see them doing from here on out. Even to the time of Christ, the Levites were groundskeepers. They were the ones who made sure the temple was upkept, everything was as it needed to be. Anything needed to be fixed, repaired, that's what they did. And so this was their job. And again, in the wilderness, they camped around the tabernacle. Remember that setup. They had their camp. They were the ones who sat to protect the tabernacle and protect anybody from defiling it and thus bringing a plague on the people of Israel. All right. That's Numbers 8. I know that's a lot. And again, some of it's stuff we talked about before. But we're going to see what God has, what these people have done. And God is preparing them for the work that is ahead. All right. Any question or comment about what we talked about tonight? If not, we're going to stop right there. Next week is our singing night, so we'll take a break. Then the week after that, the 26th, we will pick back up in Numbers 9. Numbers 9 is interesting because Numbers 9 is the first annual celebration of Passover. They've been in the wilderness. They've been out of Egypt for a year. Now they're now they're in the wilderness, and a year has passed. It's time for the Passover. We're going to talk about what they do at the Passover and how they celebrate that. But for tonight, we are done. Appreciate everyone being here. Appreciate those who are with us online. We hope to see you all Sunday morning. You're dismissed.